Over the course of the last two videos, Jess and I showed you how to create a web page using HTML, and then showed you how to apply some basic CSS to that rather uninspiring default HTML styling. By now you've hopefully done some experimentation of your own on that little pet project of yours, and have come across classes and IDs. If you haven't, fear not. We'll get you all sorted out in the next couple of minutes, and with a bit of practice, you'll soon be a CSS sharpshooter with a 1,000-yard stare and pinpoint accuracy. Classes and IDs are really just a way to label any generic HTML element. You can label your elements anything you want, so you're only limited by your imagination. But always aim to describe the purpose or content of the element you're labeling. A single ID should only be used once per page, while a class can appear multiple times per page. We'll talk about that more in a bit. Properly labeling your elements is a good idea for two reasons. First, it will make reading and maintaining your code much easier when you can easily scan your class and ID labels to see what each section of code is for. Second, you can reference your class and ID labels in CSS to style your labeled elements uniquely. What do I mean by that? Well, let's start with a concrete example using an ID. I'll open the local HTML and CSS files for our Northeast Kingdom website in TextMate, as well as open the HTML file in my browser so I can easily see all my changes in action. Each of our subheaders are H2 elements. We've used external CSS so I can style them all in one go by targeting H2s in my style sheet. That's great, but what if I want the location H2 to look different? By adding an ID label to that particular H2, we can do just that. I'll start by going into my HTML code and adding ID equals location-header to the location H2 element. Notice the dash? You can't use spaces in your names. So if you need to use multiple words in your label, use dashes or camel case your labels like so. Next, I'll open my CSS style sheet. First, I'll write a rule that I want to apply to all of my H2 elements. H2, and then in brackets, text transform, uppercase, font size, 16 pixels. Save your CSS and refresh your browser to see how all of our H2s are now uppercase and slightly smaller in font size. Next, I just want to target the location header H2 specifically. I'll write pound, which just means ID of location-header. And then in brackets, border top 1 pixel solid, B9, AF, margin top 40 pixels, and padding top 20 pixels. I could have also written the selector with the actual element tag in front of it, like so. But it wasn't necessary, so I aimed for typing as little as possible. Save and refresh and see how only our location header has a border on top and more margin and padding applied on top as well. Brilliant. You've just learned a way to target with laser accuracy any specific element on your page that you want to style distinctly. As we mentioned before, IDs are great when you want to target an item that only occurs once per page. But what happens when you want to add special styling to items that occur multiple times per page, like the prices in our menu? Well, that's where classes step in. Because there are multiple prices on our page, we'll add a class of price on a span element wrapping around each of our prices like so. Classes can be used a bajillion times per page, scientifically speaking. So now in our CSS, we'll write .price, which just means class of price, and then color 901B2E, the hex value for a cool red. When your browser renders the page, it'll look for any element that has a class of price, and wherever it finds one, it'll change the text color of that element to that cool red we just set. Save your CSS and refresh your browser, and now your prices stand out beautifully from the rest of your text. As an experiment, let's add a class of price to the H1 in our HTML. Class equals price. Save and refresh. See how easy that was? Repeat ad nauseum with any CSS rule you like. Is your brain full yet? Well, so far we've learned that IDs and classes are ways to label your content both to better understand the content at a glance, as well as to more specifically target what would otherwise be generic elements in your CSS. Those are all great things. You're on your way to sharpshooterdom. But if you really want to earn that chip on your shoulder, let's take it up a notch. CSS loves specificity. The declarations of a more specific selector will always overrule the declarations of a less specific selector. IDs are the most specific selectors around, classes take second place, and finally generic elements are the least specific and therefore most easily defeated selectors. Let's use that H1 as an example. We've given it a class of price, just for demonstration purposes of course, and now the text is red. If we inspect it, we'll see that it's overriding the generic element of body, which has a rule setting the text color to blue. Our class selector of price is overriding the less specific element selector of body. Let's take that a step further. We'll add an ID of name to the H1, then head over to our style sheet and specify that #name has a color of 132630. Save your HTML and CSS and refresh your browser. Our H1 title is no longer red but a very deep blue. Inspect the element and we'll see that ID of name with that deep blue text color has overridden the class of price with the color of red. IDs are more specific than classes, so CSS has given that selector priority. Let's get even more specific. If we create a set of CSS rules with a selector including both the ID name and class price, it will be even more specific than the ID or class alone. This time we'll set the text color to a dark aqua. Refresh and inspect that title again. Yet again, we've overridden the less specific style. It might seem a bit silly that I just showed you all that. I mean, why would I ever arbitrarily want to apply styles just to override them? Well, I wouldn't. But someday you'll be pulling your hair out trying to figure out why the rules you're trying to apply to an object just aren't sticking. I can almost guarantee you it'll be because you didn't make your selector specific enough to overrule a style being applied somewhere else. If you're interested in learning more, there's a few links about specificity below. Okay, let's recap. Classes and IDs are ways of labeling your elements both for your own sanity and for CSS styling. You can use any sensible or nonsensical ID or class label you like, but remember, spaces are not allowed. IDs should only appear on one element per page. Classes can appear any number of times. An element can have both an ID and a class, as well as multiple classes, separated by spaces. When rendering CSS styles, IDs are more specific than classes, which are more specific than generic elements. Now that you've earned your Sharpshooter's badge, join us next time as Jessica reveals a few of the CSS secrets for achieving beautiful typography on the web. For now, I'm Russ Mashmeyer, signing out.